Welcome to The Chat. I'm Catherine Glaspie, Public Information Director for Chatham County. This is our podcast where we get to talk about all things Chatham. Our goal is to talk about our services that we provide to our residents and our visitors here in Chatham County. And with me today is Abby Murphy.
Hey, everybody. And joining us is Diane with Chatham 911 Communication Services. She's the director. And Russ, he is the deputy director of Chatham 911 Communication Services. Diane and Russ, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourselves, a little background you have?
Well, I've been in the 911 industry for 33 years. I actually joined the department, Chatham County Police Department, 1986 of St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, wow.
So I had a really bang of an indoctrination. I worked in the records department initially, but I had actually spent a brief stint as a police officer about a year or so prior. Mm-hmm. So that gave me a good idea of how the operation would go from the street perspective, as well as when I was asked to become one of the first 4 communications officers to civilianize the 911 center. Prior to that, the center was actually manned by police officers, and I spent quite a bit of time in the radio room as a dispatcher during my stint as a police officer. When we initially started the 911 center, or civilianized the 911 center, it was myself and 3 other dispatchers who actually implemented that process. We implemented the very first emergency medical dispatch program for the Chatham County Police Department. Then in 2003, 2004, we began making the preparations to consolidate with Savannah Police Department's 911 department. And that actually stayed in place for 15 years. And now we're back with Chatham County as a standalone 911 department. So we are making history in several different kinds of ways.
Absolutely. And let's just talk about that for a second. You guys came back to the county as the Chatham 911 Communication Services in 2018?
2018, January 1.
And I know it's been a transition, and we're going to get into some of those things about transition, but I just want to say welcome to the family. I mean, you've been here for a year or 2 now, but welcome to the family. It's a very loving family to be in, Team Chatham, and we're happy to have you guys back.
Great, thank you. We're glad to be back, and we enjoyed our tenure as a part of the Metropolitan Police Department, but we are now able to focus on all things 911, whereas before, although we had 911 duties, the 911 center had other duties to perform as well. So now we're related to police and other functions that were a part of the police operation. So now, although we're still dispatching for the police agencies, we are able to focus more on 911 specific details that are inherent to the success of the 911 department.
Russ, it's your turn.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I am the newest member of the management team at Team Chatham 911. I've been here 7 months now, almost to the date. So I can agree with what you said. It's been a wonderful place. It's been super inviting to come in and join the team. So I'm glad to be here. I've been doing this for 12 years now. Right before I came over here, I was the 911 director in Dublin, Lawrence County. So I started off in fire and EMS. So Miss Diane started off in the police side. I started off in the fire and EMS side, and then kind of transitioned later on into the 911 world. And here I am, 12 years later, still loving it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad that both of you are here today to talk about this. You guys have a combined experience is amazing. I'm not sure you get that in a lot of departments, to have that much kind of combined experience. You have another member of your management team as well that's not here today, and I know that she has a lot of experience as well that brings to the table when you're talking about management of a 911 center. And she'll be in other shows when she's available. Somebody's got to be the cook at the office, right? So let's talk about you. You mentioned it a little bit, Diane, when you were at a part of Savannah Chatham Metropolitan Police Department, that you guys had more duties than just answering 911 calls. Is that the case today?
That is the case today. If we can back up just a little bit, our other deputy director is Judith McCook.
Okay.
She is actually over operations. Russ is over the technical aspect of the operation, and basically she runs the center. She and her operations coordinator, who determine, they actually make sure everything runs smoothly, calls are dispatched appropriately. All of our customers get the level of service that they're entitled to.
Mm-hmm.
We handle warrants. We handle as far as hit confirmation requests. For instance, a lot of people think that if there's a warrant out there on a person, that once the officer stops an individual or comes in contact with that individual, that they can just make an arrest. No, they can't.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of details that are involved in making sure that process is handled correctly, and that you don't arrest the same person for an incident twice. We handle animal services. We dispatch for animal services after hours, and whenever they don't have anyone that's available to handle their dispatch services. We do on-call notifications for law enforcement officers, calling out public information whenever there's an incident that warrants that. So we handle a lot of administrative, non-emergency type situations. However, because we're an emergency operations center, we try to keep those kinds of things out of the 911 center as much as possible. We handle 911 services for 14 different agencies.
Wow.
Actually 15, because we dispatch EMS, police, and fire countywide, with the exception of for Tybee. They have their own public safety answering point.
Sure.
But we assist every agency in Chatham County. We maintain service agreements with all of these agencies so that being the primary public safety answering point, if they need our help for anything, we're there.
Yeah, I can imagine that that's in some ways overwhelming, because you're dispatching for so many different agencies, taking calls for so many different agencies. But I can understand on the other side where it all needs to come to one place.
Yes.
Because let's face it, if I'm in an accident in a certain area, I'm not going to know if it's Port Wentworth, Bloomingdale, Pooler, unincorporated Chatham. But you guys know. You can know based on where the person's calling from, the address, so you know who to dispatch to help them, right?
Yes, we have a computer-aided dispatch system that aids our dispatchers and call takers and actually correctly indicating the address in the system so that it can be farmed to the dispatcher. A lot of people also think that the person who answers the phone is the same person that dispatches the call. Well, that's not.
That was me
true.
Until I went to see you guys.
The way that it works is the call comes in, a call taker answers the phone. They determine what kind of services are needed, where the service is needed, and they put that information into a computer-aided dispatch system, and that information is actually farmed to another dispatcher who may be in another room for dispatch. So accuracy is very important when it comes to the public knowing what information the personnel in the 911 department need to have, and actually how to give it to us. So that's why we are kind of ramping up our initiatives when it comes to public awareness, when it comes to the most critical kinds of calls, down to the most administrative level types of calls. It's important that the public knows how to give us information, especially when you got a situation like an active shooter or something, those emergency calls that are becoming more and more common in the 911 environment. When I was first with the Chatham County Police Department, there were times when we would go, like on a Sunday maybe, a whole day without a really critical type of call. But now it seems as though we're getting emergent calls, very critical type calls every day. So we need to make sure that the public knows how to help us get help to them, by giving us the information in a certain format so that we'll know, first of all, where is the emergency, what's happening, how many people are involved. All of those things are critical in us knowing how to send the proper response.
Absolutely.
Well, and you mentioned that you are receiving more and more calls. About how many calls do you get daily?
That call I'll direct
to Russ.
Yes.
Well, we get about 1,600 calls a day.
Whoa.
We average right at 50,000 a month. Some months is more, some months is less, but on average, we receive about 50,000 calls, so roughly 1,600 some change a day.
So what does that come to yearly? Because I can't do that math that quick in my head.
Last year we finished out just over 700,000 calls. 700.
We can call it 700,000 and that be pretty accurate.
Yeah.
That's
a lot.
That's a lot.
You know, we went to another 911 center in Tennessee. Diane, you and I were on that trip. We were going up to look at a facility, and they were a comparable community to us in size and economic, social things were very similar. But it blew me away when they had like a third of the calls that we have. And we were all talking about it, and nobody seems to really understand why we're that much higher. It isn't like we're this horrible place to come to. It's a safe community, but there's just a lot more calls to 911. That means that it's much more taxing to your staff. You've got to have more staff.
It is. And the nature of this work is such that, high stress, fast-paced environment, not everyone can do this kind of work. For instance, we're critical workforce personnel, and our personnel have to stay when everybody else is leaving Chatham County because of a hurricane or because of some other situation which may deem it necessary for the city to be evacuated. So that we've had a few drills here lately. That is very taxing on anybody. So you kind of really find out during instances like that whether you're suited for this job. And also, we've had staff who've been the very last people that a caller may speak to in life. They may pass away right there on the phone.
Right.
People who call in who may be suicidal, all of that, you have to know how to handle those types of things.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times the only thing that's 20/20 is hindsight,
Sure.
But we try to take the guesswork as much as possible out of everything that our communications officers do. We have a script that they follow for EMS, for emergency medical services purposes, for police, and for fire. But even with all of that, there are some things that you're just going to have to use common sense on.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So so we try to. There's a lot of training involved in this job. A lot of certifications that you have to have. You can't just walk off the streets and sit at the desk and somebody say, "Here, do what I do." We have implemented over my tenure. We've implemented a lot of training, whereas communications officers, there really wasn't a whole lot of training out there in the industry for us. But now we're working on a state level, on a national level to make sure that we cover our bases and that communications officers have the right foundation on which to start in this industry. Before Russ came on board, I used to get asked a lot of questions. Well, what happens with this? Or where does it say that in the policy pertaining to communications officer? And I would get on the computer and query my peers.
Sure.
And there was this name that kept popping up, Russ Palmer. And I was like, man, I'm going to have to call Russ. I'm going to have to email Russ and see if he can help me out with this. So he was our go-to person on a state level with the Directors Association. Himself and this other young man named Jonathan Jones, they were the ones that we actually kind of went to for guidance on certain policies and procedures as it pertained to communications officer. So I was delighted when he came on board. I was like, hey, well, I don't have to make that call anymore because Russ is here.
Now she just walks down the hall and says, hey, what'd you think about this?
Yeah.
And I think that's great. I mean, that is awesome. That means that you know what you're doing and you fit in here and you're helping form our department. And I think that's awesome. Abby, I know you and I, we live our life, it seems like, going from crisis to crisis in public information. That just seems to be the way of the world. But I don't know about you, but I couldn't do what they do. I really couldn't.
No, and something that's always stuck with me, Diane, is when you told me, this was a good way of putting it, that whenever someone calls, they're calling on probably one of the worst days of their life. So you're dealing with someone who's panicking, potentially something really awful is going on. And that really put it into perspective. You know, anytime the phone rings, you don't know what's going to be on the other end. And so I just really appreciate those that are able to take on that task and to work in 911 because it's such an important job.
It absolutely is. You've mentioned a couple times some of the technology, and some of the technology is changing. So, Russ, this question is for you. Tell me about some of the newer technologies, just in a high overview. We're going to have you back to talk about them a little bit more in depth. And I should tell you that I absolutely love tech. Tech hates me. So I'm probably going to ask a lot of stupid questions, but just bear with me.
It's okay. So Ms. Diane already talked a little bit about our CAD system, the computer-aided dispatch system. It is kind of the whole brain of the operation, if you will. Everything goes into that. All the calls go into it. It gives us our recommendations for police, fire, and EMS who to send. That's kind of the central place for everything to be saved in, to be stored in. We pull all of our records from it. It's the true brain of the operation. But to put it in there, you have to know where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
So we have our phone system. We're blessed enough to have a nice phone system that's capable of receiving. They have different phases of a 911 call, if you will. They have phase 1 technology, which kind of gives you a general roundabout location based off of the cell phone tower itself. So 85% of our calls come from cell phones. So nobody has a landline anymore and really uses it. So 85% of our call volume comes on a cell phone, which can be a challenge in itself when it comes to locating people. But with the phase 1 technology, it gives us a rough location of where they're at based on the tower. And then we have phase 2 technology, which actually starts to triangulate based off of the location of the phone. So it'll triangulate it on the tower, and it can actually get down to like 30 meters of where it's at just based off of that. So it's a pretty good route. But I mean, if you're in a crowded area and 30 meters, that's a big area when you're walking down River Street trying to figure out where you're at. So
absolutely.
We've recently implemented a wonderful program called Rapid SOS. It's been hugely beneficial for us. We've had a lot of success with it. It takes pretty much every type of connectable device, and your phone's one of those devices. So it'll take it. It uses the GPS location. It uses the phase 1, phase 2 technology in the wireless carrier. It uses Bluetooth. It uses all kind of different things that'll connect back to it and give us a more precise location with it. I mean, we can get down to like 5 meters with that.
Oh, wow.
The only bad thing is not all carriers participate in it, and not all phones are eligible for it. So we still have to know where you are. That's just a tool that we can use sometimes to help locate it. And whenever we have used it and been able to use it successfully, it's been a huge game changer for us.
I'm sure it is. I mean, that's with like you said, a lot of people don't have landline phones. Right. I just got rid of my landline phone at home. Only people that had my phone number was my mom and my mother-in-law, and they still called on our cell phones. So it was kind of like, why do you pay for it? But it does. It's always something that's worried me that if I became incapacitated, couldn't tell 911 what was going on, that they wouldn't be able to find me. But now that makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah, the key with a cell phone is to stay on the phone, because the longer that we keep you on the phone, especially a cell phone, the more time that the technology has to catch up with itself and can actually get a more precise location with it. So, is
there a certain amount of time that it takes to do that, or is it just sometimes it's a little bit longer than others?
It really depends on the conditions outside. It depends on how close you are to the tower, so how good your cell phone strength signal is, and there's no magic time frame to get it every time.
That makes sense.
And something I was wondering, how is it handled if someone calls and they're not, they don't speak English? How do you communicate? Are there communicators that can translate that speak Spanish or some other languages fluently, or is there some technology in place to help with that?
We use language line services. They're a service that actually assist us. We dial in. We have their number programmed into our phones in the radio room, and basically they will identify the language, whether it's Vietnamese, whether it's Thai, whether it's Spanish, and find an interpreter for us. And we've been using that for some time now.
They have like 140 different languages that they can help translate. So
wow,
it's a one-stop shop for pretty much everything we need.
That's pretty amazing, and I assume that they can do that pretty fast, actually, for you. It isn't like, oh, well, we have to identify us, and it's going to take a couple minutes, and then it's going to be another couple minutes before we find you a translator. You're working in an emergency. This has to be done, like, really quick.
Yeah, and usually the person can identify to the operator what language they speak.
Okay.
So we try to make it as efficient as possible to try and get help to everyone. If they can tell us their location, we can send them help while we're trying to find a translator. But the key is knowing where they need the help.
Right.
And if they need EMS, fire, police, but if they can't tell us, we can actually send somebody if we know the location, and then they can tell us what they need. But in order to make sure that it's most efficient, we basically people need to be educated on how to provide information to us should they be in trouble, whether they need EMS, whether they need fire, whether they need police, whether they need animal services. Efficiency is the key.
And let's talk about that a little bit more, because you've mentioned it several different times, and I know we're getting towards the end of our program, so I want to make sure that we get this in here today. When I call 911 because I have an emergency, you need certain information from me, and you need it, you mentioned, in a certain format.
Right.
Tell us what that is.
The format is, tell us where you need the help. Where the person's calling from may not be where they need emergency services. So the location is key. Then tell us what's going on. Are there any weapons involved? If it's something that like a domestic dispute or something where an officer's safety, the responders there might be a threat to their lives. Who has the weapon? What's their description? Are they male, female? Give us their description from head to toe, from the outside in. Everything, the most obvious clothing first, so that the officers are responders. When they get there, they can readily identify the person who may be the threat. If they're in a vehicle, what kind of vehicle are they driving? From the top to the bottom, color, year, make, model, body style, tag number. If we can get a tag number, if they leave the scene, then we can actually query that information in our system and find out what kind of vehicle and who that vehicle is registered to. So those are kinds of direction of travel. Which way did they go? How many people were involved? So those are all key elements that we need, even in our EMS response. If somebody broke their leg, the EMS personnel wouldn't have to carry in their defibrillator equipment.
Sure.
So telling us what the problem is, giving us accurate and concise information would ensure the appropriate response.
And I want to just make a point here. All that information is super important, and we need to try to give all that information as well as you can. But if something's wrong and you can't communicate, by just keeping that line open, you guys are going to find them and send them help, right? As best as you can.
As best we can.
Yeah.
I would say that the only thing is we have to know something's going on. We get a lot of 911 calls where all you hear is like a swishing noise of somebody's pocket because their phone called 911. So, it's not necessarily that we're going to send for every 911 call that we get somebody to, or else we'd be chasing pockets all day.
Sure.
So we have to kind of know something's going on, but our folks are trained to active listen and listen to the background noise and Are they hearing something going on? Are they hearing an argument in the background, or are they hearing like gasping noises? It might be something medical related. So they're trained to listen to the background and try and make sure that there's something going on to it. But so if you do keep the line open, hopefully we can get something out of you. Just to know that I need help is obviously good enough.
Absolutely.
And
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, people knowing building numbers,
Yes.
pay attention. All of us as citizens, when we're traveling, especially, know where you are. Pay attention to mile markers, direction of travel, north, south, east, west. So that if you have a situation, whether you're involved or whether another citizen or a motorist is involved, you'll be able to, if you dial 911, you'll be able to say we're I-16 eastbound at the 155 mile marker.
Sure.
That will help responders, regardless of what city you're in, actually pinpoint your location. If there are chemicals and things of that nature involved, we need to know that. If it's spilled out onto the roadway, if it's in the air, whatever the case may be, first of all, keep yourself safe.
Right.
And get to a safe location where you can provide information to us. And if you can't talk, as Russ said, leave the phone open, the phone line open, so that we can triangulate where you are.
Sure.
Especially if you have a smartphone, one of the later phones.
Yeah.
That will help us to find out where you are within a certain area, proximity. So the key is knowing what information to give us. If you don't know, just tell us everything you do know. Tell us what you see, landmarks, things of that nature that can aid in a response.
In my world, we call that situational awareness. Be aware of where you are and what's around you. I know I thank God I've never been a 911 communicator, but I did work at a law enforcement agency where I did take information, so I had to run through a list of questions with people, and that taught me to be more aware of my surroundings. So I'd play games with myself, and I still find myself doing it, even after all these years of being gone from that certain position. But I'll be driving through my neighborhood, and I'll see something that just looks a little odd to me, and I look, okay, I noted the time, I noted who was around, the house number, what cars were there. I'm not going to take, the license tag numbers, but you try to be situationally aware so that you can remember. So if something ever does come up, you can go back and say, you know what, there was a red car, there was a sedan that was sitting here. Now, I'm probably going to know the make and model because I'm a car person.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't expect my husband to know that because he's not a car person. But I'd expect him to know that there's a red car there. So I think that if people are trying to be a little bit more situationally aware of what's around them, they can certainly help more in an emergency. Just my little 2 cents on it, and I'm going to shut up now because we're over time. But we're gonna do our final thoughts here. So, Abby, final thoughts, questions?
Just a quick question. There may be an instance where someone it's not necessarily an emergency, but they want to report something. So I know there's a non-emergency line that people can call. What is that number?
It's 912-652-6500.
Okay.
And if you're not sure and you can't remember that number, call us on 911.
Okay.
The other thing we would like to mention is that we do have scripts that our communications officers have to ask questions from. And I know that it seems like you may be asked a library of questions, but it's important to answer the questions. We do have the capability of actually typing your location in and basic information that's needed to actually get the units rolling or get them en route to you. But they will continue to ask you questions that will help us to determine your needs.
And that information is then communicated to your dispatch officers that then go to either the police officers, the EMS, or fire, so that they're getting the most updated information before they walk into your incident. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. Russ, final thoughts?
Just thank you for having us out here. We hope to come back and do some more.
Absolutely.
I like that tech talk idea. We could have some fun with that.
Uh-oh, I think I just got myself into a whole lot of trouble here.
I think so.
But I think it'll be a lot of fun. Diane, final thoughts?
Call us if you need us. If you're not sure which agency to call, we're there. We're a 24-hour operation. We do police, fire, and EMS, but just like we want to help you, we need your help in order to make sure that you are educated or you get the services that you need from us. So we also have people who do quality assurance. If you have a problem with a call, that the way that it was handled or whatever, the public needs to know that they can contact us, myself, Russ, Deputy Director McCook, talk to us personally about your experience. And that's how we get better. We want to make sure that our staff does what they're supposed to do.
Absolutely. Customer service is a very important thing here at Team Chatham for us, both internal and external, but especially that external customer service to our residents and our visitors. That's one of our highest priorities here in the county. And I think that your quality control officer and just the fact that people can reach out to you guys if needed is so important to our residents, so that they can let you know when you do a good job and when they don't feel like you did a good job. That's important for us to know.
As Russ said before, we handle over 700,000 calls for service a year. Mm-hmm. So in that number of calls, sometimes mistakes are made.
Sure.
And the only way that we're going to know that we've made mistakes is for us to have feedback. In the communications world, there's a statement that says, there's a phrase, feedback completes the loop of understanding.
Oh, I like that.
So if we get feedback from our citizens, I mean, you are our customers. And when we're not working, we're citizens.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So we expect good, excellent customer service in our part as citizens. So when we're on our jobs, when we're working, it's not just a job for us, because we want to help save lives. We want to impact people's lives in a positive way. Mm-hmm. So the only way that we're going to do that is to, first of all, make sure that our communications officers have a good foundation on which to build, that they have all the resources and tools that they need. And then once they utilize these tools and resources, they're actually in there doing the job. And we need to hear from the citizens in the event something's not right, or even when something's really good.
Sure.
Because everybody likes to hear that they've done something exceptionally well. So we want to reward them. And even if it's just saying, hey, John Q. Public or Miss Palmer called and said that you did an excellent job on that call. Thank you for helping save her life. Mm-hmm. That kind of completes the circle for them.
Sure.
Because a lot of times responders don't get a lot of closure when it comes to the calls or situations mm-hmm. that they've handled. So that actually helps us in more ways than one. But we encourage our people, hey, do the best that you can. And when you pick up that phone, you think about the kind of service that you want as a citizen. And that's what you need to give.
I think that's an awesome way of looking at it. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you guys so much for being here today. We are going to have you guys back to do a series of podcasts with us so that we can really get into 911, talk about that tech talk, talk about some more things about people calling in, some of the other things that you guys do. So we're looking forward to having you back with us. And thank you all for joining us today on the chat about all things Chatham. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week.